Jesus, as a human being, learns to obey. As I said before, he's not a divine computer. He learns to obey. Luke teaches us that he grew in wisdom and in physical stature. And he learned by listening to well-known rabbis, I would think. He learned by going up to the temple area and observing the sacrificial system there. So that, for instance, when his cousin John points at him and says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," Jesus, by that time in his life, would have known that at least part of his work is connected to what he's seen over the years in the temple area, in the sacrificial system of the temple area. He would have begun to make those equations. He learns to obey in the wilderness when he's tempted by the evil one for 40 days and 40 nights. So, Willard's point, if Christ himself, not infected with sin, not incurvatus in se, if Christ himself used very concrete means to cultivate and nourish his relationship with his Father, how much more so we in our much more troubled condition? How much more so we? Because we've got cancer. He didn't have cancer, and yet he learned to obey as an embodied self. Sin just kills us. Sin is like cancer cells in our body. So he's genuinely human. And the early church had a hard time understanding this. The early church wondered, well, for instance, Willard mentions this verb in Docetism. Docetism was an early Christian heresy. And the early Christian community had a hard time fully comprehending and believing that Jesus had a human body just like yours and mine, apart from sin. So, there were major debates over the first 400 years of the church's history. To what extent is he a human being? And so, when it comes to the question of Christ's body, there were some who were very Greek in their thinking, and they said he only seems to have a body. But it's not a body like ours. It only seems to be a body like ours. Maybe it was kind of, some people thought after his ascension into heaven, maybe it was a ghost-like body. But they had a hard time accepting the reality that Jesus had a brain like we have a brain, lungs like we have lungs, bones, blood, that he needed to breathe air. And there were some early Christians who said no, it was like a human body. Christ was like a human body, some Christians taught, early Christians, and then God for a brain. And so God's brain animated a human body. Did Jesus sleep? That's a yes. Did Jesus sleep? He slept. Did Jesus speak with a mouth and a tongue? Yes. Did Jesus learn? Yes. Just as we. In the Garden of Gethsemane, what are the disciples all doing? They're sleeping. What's Christ trying to get them to do? To wake up. Why? Because there's going to come a moment of horrific temptation and horror. Willard makes a very interesting point about what's going on in the Garden of Gethsemane. The spiritually disciplined person knows what to do and how to do it. Let me say that again. The spiritually disciplined person knows what to do and how to do it. I'll add a few things on here. The spiritually disciplined person, because of what the disciplines allow to flow into our lives, the spiritually disciplined person, I would argue, has a high wisdom level. High wisdom level. So that when they encounter a situation that's difficult and tangled and demanding, they know how to respond. And they know how to respond in love. Now, in the Garden of Gethsemane, I said this earlier this morning, that's why, Willard argues, that's why Jesus keeps trying to wake the disciples up. He knows that if they keep sleeping, they will not be prepared for what's about to happen. He tries to wake them up, does he not? Do you remember? In the Garden of Gethsemane, he tries to wake the disciples up at least twice. Twice. And they can't stay awake. And then all hell breaks loose. And they don't know how to respond. So all Peter knows to do is pull out a sword and chop somebody's ear off. And Jesus says, stop it, put that sword back in its sheath. And he heals that person's ear. He was ready, they weren't. He was ready, Willard argues, he was ready because he was praying fervently. Because he knew what he was going to face, though he was not sinful. And they are weighed down with sleep. And then suddenly something unexpected happens. We are all going to face the unexpected. I wish I could tell you we could just skate through life and things will be fine and every story be exactly what we wish it would be. Such is not the case as we live between the times. Some of you this day will suddenly be touched by the unexpected. And it might be deeply demanding, deeply grieving, could be very hard. But you'll be ready. You'll be ready, and increasingly ready as time goes on, as we adopt the manner of life that Jesus himself lived as that great master of the spiritual life. I know I look at you, and I want you to ask this question. It's a very sober question. Someday, God will ask something of you. He will ask something of you. And I want you to be prepared for what he asks. Oftentimes, what he asks of us will be good and hard. At other times, he'll just ask us to deeply trust as we're struggling with sin. He'll ask us to deeply trust when we bury somebody we deeply love and we thought they were going to get well, or there's been an accident. It happens sooner or later. What is he going to ask of us? And what Foster and Willard and I'm trying to do are to prepare us both for this particular day and for those other days when something unexpected does happen, like the Garden of Gethsemane. One of the things that Americans have such a hard time with is facing the reality that as they grow older, harder things happen more often. And finally, they get sick. And 33% die after a long, protracted illness. 33% die after a short, intense illness. These are the stats, folks. And 33% are killed. Those are the stats. Sorry. Well, it's all right. From the Christian perspective, we live between the times. So we prepare ourselves to be able to love even as we are asked to do something very difficult. You want to ask yourself the question, though. Let's think of it this way. As you analyze over the course of the semester who you are and where your strengths and weaknesses lie, then I would think that as you decide which spiritual disciplines you will particularly invest yourself in, you would choose those disciplines that particularly address where you're weak, not where you're strong. I've given the illustration of my own personality, left to myself, self-indulgent. I want what I want when I want it. So there's a particular spiritual discipline that's helping me over the years to unlearn that and to replace, what do you think the antonym of self-indulgence is? What's the opposite of self-indulgence? Self-control. Self-control. So what does fasting do? Fasting trains me as an embodied self in such a manner that finally, remember how we used sowing to the Spirit last class? So finally, I keep planting seeds in this field, and what begins to blossom in the field? Little flowers of self-control. No, it sounds kind of funny, but I think that's how it works. Little flowers of self-control. So while I still deeply love Dunkin' Donuts, I don't have to go every day. 1 day a week is fine, maybe 2. But not every day, and not 4 donuts, maybe 1. See what I'm saying? Take a look in Willard now, toward the end of the book. People who think that they are spiritually superior because they make a practice of a discipline such as fasting or silence or frugality are entirely missing the point. The need for extensive practice. He writes very carefully. The need for extensive practice of a given discipline is an indication of our weakness, not our strength. We can even lay it down as a rule of thumb that if it's easy for us to engage in a certain discipline, we probably don't need to, what's the verb? Practice it. Like an athlete practices. Michael Jordan, I'm telling you, when he would practice, he would not go out to the basket and shoot 150 layups. What, you think he did that? It was just second nature to him. You didn't have to think about it. Look at the next line. Baseball player Pete Rose, when asked to explain his phenomenal success as an athlete, said, quote, I practice. See, he's used that word practice at least 4 or 5 times here. I practice what I'm not good at. Most folks practice what they're good at. The same is true for our success in our spiritual living. So I think the way to handle this issue of the spiritual disciplines is, first of all, number 1, ask yourself, what am I not good at? That's why self-analysis of some kind, self-awareness is surely helpful at this point. And to do it before God and surround it all with the grace of God. This is a triple asterisk, if I can put it that way. Everything starts with the grace of God. Everything starts with the love of God. I believe I said this in the first class. God is not going to be surprised by something you learn about yourself. God will not say, oh, I didn't know you were like that. You're sinful. Who would have thought? God is not like that. God loves you at the beginning of your story. And then he asks you to change. So what are you not good at? And then the second question is this. Which of those classical disciplines of the spiritual life can help you become good at something that you're not good at? So, for example, some of us are not good at leading a chaste life. We struggle with sexual sin. Or we struggle with money. Or we struggle with ... Then the question becomes, all right, that's the reality of the situation, so we confess and say, Lord, I'm struggling to lead a chaste life. I'm not good at it. And he says, I know. I know. And you say, I need help. He says, I know. And then, see, there'll be certain of those classical disciplines. This is so encouraging. There'll be certain of those classical disciplines that can help us learn how to live a chaste life. With the result that 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we have what? In that particular area, we've changed. We've changed, and we're healthy spiritually in that particular area where we were struggling.